yesterday, right here at CPAC, President Trump promised that the forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. The forgotten man, said the president, is the heart of this new movement. And this was not the first time President Trump has referred to the forgotten man, right? As early as election night, in his acceptance speech, the president mentioned a forgotten man. In his inaugural address, President Trump promised the forgotten man, "Everyone is listening to you now." So President Trump has made the forgotten man his hero, his mascot, his meme, right? So I'm here to talk about who precisely the forgotten man is. In fact, in the United States, 2 forgotten men figure in our history, and they are not on the same side. It's conflict. It's kind of 2 forgotten men at odds in a wrestling match of forgotten men. Which man the president chooses to serve and honor matters to our economy and to our future as a united nation. The first forgotten man is familiar from the history book pages on the Great Depression. He is the forgotten man evoked by presidential candidate Franklin Roosevelt. In 1932, FDR went on Twitter. No, I'm just kidding. He went on the radio, the Lucky Strike Hour, and he got ready and gave a big speech. He said, "It's important to remember the forgotten man at the bottom of the economic pyramid." That is, he meant the poor. What's key here is that by forgotten man, President Roosevelt meant a group or class, not an anonymous individual. You notice the article before the noun, the poor. After election, President Roosevelt set out to serve other forgotten groups with his New Deal. Labor unions, a group, not an individual. For them, Roosevelt signed the Wagner Act, which is a kind of tiger of a labor law next to our own pussycat law. The farmers, a group, got an agricultural subsidy. Another group, senior citizens, to them, Roosevelt gave what was the greatest benefit of all time in the period, Social Security. Youth, as a group, got the National Youth Administration by executive order. And the Texas office head of the National Youth Administration was a young man named Lyndon Johnson. Another group, African Americans. Roosevelt spoke at Howard University and he told them there should be no forgotten men and no forgotten races. In fact, if you took an X-ray of the New Deal, you'd see that the entire anatomy of the Roosevelt program was dedicated, it was shaped by serving groups of constituencies. It built up lobbies. There's a famous cartoon from the 1930s of a worker telling President Roosevelt, "Yes, you remembered me." And in 1936, those blocks of constituents returned the favor and they remembered Roosevelt. In 1936, Roosevelt won re-election by a landslide. That is, he defined the landslide, winning 46 of 48 states. So politically, fostering classes works, but the policy, and this is important to remember, fell short economically. For serving groups didn't always translate into jobs. The New Deal's insistence on high pay, for example, which is a kind of super minimum wage that they had, proved tragic. The new high wages sounded good, but they made the labor price too high for companies to rehire. Remember, it's the Great Depression. So the big companies did not rehire, and the Depression lengthened. You probably heard family stories, great-grandparents, grandparents, about the divide between the worker and the unemployed one. It was all right in the Great Depression if you had a job. Nice work if you can get it. There was this chasm between the employed and the unemployed. And as late as 1937 or 1938, years into the new program, unemployment was not 5, not 10, but 15%. By remembering forgotten groups, Roosevelt forgot the original one, the jobless. The intervention chilled the economy. The Dow Jones Industrial Average never came back the entire 30s. Recoveries are living things. Recoveries make choices. Every year in the 1930s, the recovery found a different reason to stay away. The nation experienced a kind of calculus of frustration, the always recovering but never recovered economy. What's more, the government habit of protecting classes fostered tension among Americans. Forever there's a winner, there's always a loser, right? And often the loser was a regular fellow. Here's a quote. "Who is the forgotten man in Muncie?" an Indiana paper asked in the later 30s. "I know him as intimately as I know my own undershirt. He is the one who is trying to get along without public relief. In the meantime, taxpayers go on supporting many that would not work." Roosevelt himself widened the divide. You think language now is rough. Roosevelt was rougher. When businessmen got angry at him, the president said, "I welcome their hatred." Can you imagine? The country became more divided than it is today. So in this period, the same time, disillusioned Americans recalled there had been another forgotten man in national memory, one who predated Roosevelt very much, a forgotten man who'd been around since the 1880s. That forgotten man had been described by a professor named William Graham Sumner. Professor Sumner had his own little algebra for capturing his forgotten man, and you want to follow me just for a sec. He did it with letters. A, the person at the top, wants to help X, the person at the bottom. Okay, sounds sort of like Roosevelt. B wants to help X, the person at the bottom. Okay, again, we believe in charity, but there might be a problem when A and B get together and coerce C, some random third party, into co-funding their perhaps good but perhaps dubious project for X. C is the forgotten man, Sumner said. He's there, but you can't even identify him as a class. He's an anonymous individual, and he called him the man who pays, the man who prays, the man who is not thought of. That forgotten man was the one known up until the New Deal. It tells you a lot about our schools, and I know we've been discussing it this day, that we never heard of Sumner's forgotten man, doesn't it? Now you are reaching the end of your conference. What's the takeaway on the two forgotten men? You can translate these different forgotten men, Roosevelt's and Sumner's, into terms of political philosophy. The forgotten man of Roosevelt defined groups, and it's in the populist, progressive tradition. The forgotten man of Sumner, the anonymous individual, is in the classical liberal tradition. Yeah, I said liberal. Did you hear that? Liberal. The original kind of liberalism is our kind of liberalism. Progressives are not liberals. The sovereign individual we heard about before can be conservative and he can be liberal. We're the original liberals. How might a president serve such an individual, an anonymous forgotten man? By leading Congress as it takes broad measures that benefit all, and by saying no to lobbying groups, especially entitlement groups. Because unless we say no to entitlement lobbies, we ensure a whole new crowd of forgotten men, our children and grandchildren. I'm going to make an aside just to mention, there was a president who understood this about serving the individual, not the lobby. In fact, that president made saying no to powerful lobbyists his rule. That president was Silent Cal, Calvin Coolidge, who served in the 20s. It is better to kill a bad law than pass a good one, Coolidge said. better. So Coolidge vetoed 50 times. Today, lawmakers are proud when they can reduce the increase in spending. That's what they call a cut. Coolidge actually cut the budget when he left office after 67 months. Even though the population grew and the economy grew, the federal budget was actually lower than when he came in. I'll let this sink in. And campaigners for Coolidge knew that he stood for the original forgotten man. They said he spoke for another phrase you might have heard in another context, the silent majority. He represented the forgotten man who seeks no favors, not the preferred classes. A second aside, for future CPAC radio and events, if Coolidge were a stock, he'd be a buy. I personally am such a huge Coolidge fan that I work at his foundation. We think at the Coolidge Foundation, we think Coolidge is the forgotten president. So we bring hundreds of teens from across America to debate economics and the Constitution in the Coolidge Debate Cup at the presidential birthplace in Plymouth Notch, Vermont. We have a Coolidge Merit Scholarship for college, for which this year 15,000 kids registered to apply. 2 scholarships, 15,000 candidates. And we plan to bring Coolidge to Washington so more Americans can get to know him. Imagine it. Roosevelt Monument, Wilson House, Coolidge House. Everyone has to go, right? But even harder than choosing a favorite president is choosing a forgotten man. Which will it be for President Trump, the individual or the group? When the White House picks winners or losers, it's following in the line of Roosevelt. When the White House undertakes measures that benefit the overall population, the White House honors the individual. The record suggests that the latter sort of move makes the US stronger in the long run. The White House has to decide, but we have to decide too, perhaps even more. Lobbies, groups, and cronyism, I spoke about that earlier here with the Charles Koch Institute, have dominated us for a long time. Both parties have lobbyists and cronies. It's a bipartisan problem. I hope that this year will usher in a new era for the original, neglected, forgotten man. It is this anonymous forgotten man who stands, as the president said, at the heart of the movement, but also the heart of the country. So I would like to thank, just carefully, Dan Schneider, CPAC, and this audience for giving the quiet, crucial, forgotten man the spotlight this afternoon. Meet him, study him, follow him, and never forget the forgotten man. Thank you.